Hi, my name is Jay Aronson, and in this training, we're going to cover what you need to consider when setting up your clients, projects, matters, engagements, whatever you call them, in your time and billing application. And in particular, we're going to look at the naming conventions and the differences between how they're handled in Sage Timeslips and Tabs3. Both these applications have been around for decades. They're really entrenched in the industry, and they're very feature rich, and a lot of firms out there are using both these applications. And if you're considering choosing between them, I'm going to try and hopefully highlight in this particular training a difference in how they handle the naming conventions in the setup process. Before we get started, just want to let you know that here's my email address and website. If you have any questions regarding anything we covered or will cover, or anything that questions you have about Timeslips or Tabs3, feel free to call me. Okay, so when you're looking at these two applications, you have to consider their different functionality. How does Timeslips handle, or any time and billing application handle, the naming conventions, the setup, and how is it different from Tabs, and which one of these applications will best suit my needs? So you have to look at the applications themselves, what their functionality is, and whether or not that will meet your requirements. Some of the other things you have to look at are third-party integrations. Okay, so if you're an insurance defense firm and you have to bill electronically, how are the insurance companies, what are their requirements for naming their cases, matters? So you have to take that into consideration when you're setting up your database. Let me say something off the top as an overriding concern or consideration and planning issue. I think what it's important, we're going to talk about a lot of differences between these applications, differences in how they might handle one feature or functionality different than the other. And no matter which application, no matter how you do this, what's important to do is, and to keep in mind, is to be consistent, to have a consistent convention throughout your application. You don't want to have some names set up this way, some set up that way, because it makes it harder to process. It makes it harder for the staff to actually enter and search and report on the data and to manage that data. So as an overriding consideration and thing to keep in mind, you really should try and find a process that's consistent and a convention that's consistent. All right, so we have to consider the requirements of outside third parties, electronic billing. You also have cost recovery systems. Some of my clients have photocopy machines that track account codes to then bill back for photocopying. And that feeds electronically back into your time and billing application. So those are some considerations. How do they handle, how do they manage, how do they track and need the naming conventions in their system? or the number system or whatever they're using. So another thing we need to look at is when we're entering time, how we want to make it as easy as possible on the staff and anybody who's actually entering their time, attorneys or whatever timekeepers, as well as being able to search. How can we make it easy to search and to be able to find quickly what I need to find so that I can bill my time and expenses, and I don't have to, it's hard enough. You know, people hate to enter their time, and it's hard enough to get them to do it. You want to make it as easy as possible, and that's coming back to what I said earlier, was to make sure that you make it as consistent as possible. So those are some concerns and considerations, as well as your reporting. How do you want to organize, report on, and get data out of the system and manage it so that you can plan properly, you can process properly, you can manage the practice efficiently. I skipped over accounts receivable and billing because that's a different consideration. And in Timeslips, depending on how you set up your naming convention, you have an option to bill and to track your accounts receivable differently depending on how you do it. So there's two options in Timeslips. In Tabs, there's not really two options. Every client matter is actually billed separately, and the AR is handled separately, but you can actually bill the separate matters together in one bill. So we'll look at a little of that. The billing part, AR, the reporting is going to be a little bit outside of the scope of this training, but we will look at the naming conventions, and I'll talk about, especially in Timeslips, how that affects AR and billing. But all right, so let's look at Tabs and then Timeslips. So in Tabs, you have the client ID, which is limited to 12 characters. And there's 3 different ways you can establish or set up or have a convention for that client ID. It can be numeric, and each of these can have a decimal place. So and we'll look at the actual application in a second, but you can have a number, a decimal place, and then numbers that follow, all adding up to 12, including the decimal place. You can do that in a mixed fashion where you have alphanumeric characters before the decimal place and then numbers after the decimal place. And then the alpha, we call it alpha, but you can have alphanumeric characters before and after. So that is something you have to think about and consider when you're setting up Tabs. All right, in Tabs, you also have a name search field, which is limited to 16 characters, a client name field, which is limited to 50 characters, and a work description, which is limited to 50 characters. And let's go into Tabs, and I'll show you how that all kind of plays out. All right, so when you're actually setting up Tabs in your customization, this is where you decide which naming key type you want to use, whether you want to use mixed. Let's go into the maintenance. I got to close this first. And look at the key types here. So this is if we were going to change them. So you can have the numeric, which is what this was set up originally as. And I just changed it a little while ago to mixed, just to put a couple of examples in here for you. So you see that you have numeric before a decimal place and numeric after. You have alpha characters before and numeric after. You can actually have alphanumeric before and numeric after in this mixed case. And then the alpha case where you have alpha characters before and after. And then you could decide on which spot you want to put your decimal place. So that's, excuse me, the key types. All right, so when we are now in tabs and we're looking at the client list, right, we're looking at, here's our client number, ID, name search, client name, and work description. So when you're entering a fee in tabs, let's go back over here for a second. When you're entering a fee, you can type in your client name, and it'll give you the name here, and you can then find, so if you find the ID, so you could type in there anything, if you know the name search, the client name or the work description, if you type it in there, you can actually get to, oops, sorry. Let's start a new one here. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Let's start a new fee. So this is a client ID. If you wanted to, and you knew, 100 would bring you to the first 100 in the list, and then you could pick it from here. If you actually knew the was 100.00, then it would just go to the next one. So if it was, I think it was I know there's an 850.00, it just goes to the next one if you know that's what it is. If you don't know exactly what it is, you can type in here. I know there's William John. And so if I look at that, then I know, okay, 101 is the number. I click OK, and 101 comes up. So this is, now what if you don't know the number? And so you can click this drop down, and if you don't know a name, the exact name, it's not coming up for you, whatever, you can open this lookup screen and you could search by client ID. You could, and usually this is a short list. So typically this list will be, hundreds, even thousands of clients deep. So if you know that it's 850 something, so you can search on the client ID column. But if you don't know the ID or what number, what range, and you know that it's, I know a name search has something to do with white then it'll bring up all the Kelly Whites. If I don't, I can also look in the client name, right, and look at, you know, Klein, and it'll bring me to the first Klein, or William, and it'll bring me to William. Or if I'm in the work description, I'm not sure exactly what the exact description is, but I know it has real estate. So then it'll bring up the real estate and everyone with real estate. If it brings up, if I do will, it won't bring up anything because it's not at the beginning. It has to start with, you have to get the start of the description, not in the middle. Now, if you don't know the start and you know it's will something in the description, you could go to the filter here and you could type in will and it'll bring up the will and the William. So those are your options on how to search based on the naming conventions you've set up in Tabs. Now, if you notice here, I set up these to show you that there are differences in the length. And so this, you could do, there's 12 characters here, 12 here, but I also did Peter's with the mixed 25501 and Peterson with his straight alpha with the numeric after. But the problem with this client ID field is that it's only 12 characters. So you have to use the other fields to help you manage the process. I think Tabs has been around so long, and it used to be in the numeric field, the number ID field, the numbers in general ledgers and all those kinds of other systems comes from the old DOS days when things were numbered. And so they ported that over into this system and hadn't changed this and used these other fields to supplement. Whereas in Timeslips, we can look at that now. They have alphanumeric characters, and let's go back into the Timeslips, and I'll show you that. Okay, so in Timeslips, there's the nickname 1 and nickname 2, and they're both up to 30 characters. And you can have alpha, numeric, any combination thereof. And it's here important to, make sure that, again, the naming conventions are consistent throughout the system. So and then in Timeslips, you have nickname 1, nickname 2, and you could, in nickname 1, use a naming convention with your client project or client matter or client engagement in the nickname 1, and Timeslips calls that a parent child or a master client, master project relationship, so that there are keys that are driven off of that functionality. So when you have a client name and then a separator and then a project all in nickname 1, there's a trigger. There are triggers that help you manage the process, set up new projects for a client easily. Attributes from the master can be inherited by the child, if you will, on setup. And so once you've designed the system, set it up, people don't have to think as much. They don't have to remember as many switches to turn on, turn off, attributes to add, to subtract, whatever. You can use that to help manage the process so it makes it easy for the staff and they don't forget things that they need to do. And in that nickname one, each of the nickname ones are going to get billed separately in Timeslips. Just like each client ID in Tabs will get a separate bill, although you can process them together and send them as a group. Same thing with Timeslips. You can process client, project, bills in a group, and but the accounts receivable are all separate. Now, in Timeslips, you also have a client reference. So a client project or a client without the project can have a reference. And I'll show you in the slips where those references come in, but you can identify on a bill each reference. You can use them as matters separately, but have the accounts receivable all be in one. Some of my clients, their clients have that as a requirement, and so that's an option that you have in Timeslips. Let's go into Timeslips and let's look at how that's done. Oops. Hold on one second. Why doesn't that really... This was open a minute ago. Okay, there we go. All right, so in Timeslips, let's go to the names here. So this is client nickname one, and you can have up to 30 characters. As well as client nickname two, you can have up to 30 characters. You can also auto format these, which we're not going to get into, but so that you can standardize, if you want to, some of the pieces of the naming. But a lot of my clients, or some of my clients, might do it in nickname two, where you'd have a number, and the number would be the year and the next client number. So the year dash the next client number, and you could set this up to automate and have the next number automatically appear, and with the year change. But anyways, we're not gonna get into that or dwell on that. So now I mentioned the client master functionality. So when you name the client name as a master, you identify it as a master with the right conventions, the child, the new client, can take the contact in reference to the rates, the custom fields, the billing arrangements, and all of these other attributes directly from the master or from a template. And that way it makes it easy, and all these features and functions are set up automatically as soon as you basically put in the name. So that makes it easy on the staff. Here is our client list. And in this case, we have our client nickname 1 and nickname 2. We also have a full name, address, and so forth. And this is where we would toggle on or toggle off whether this is a master client or not. Now, with that, let's go to North, because that's an actual master. The master client is North. There's a indicator saying that all of the matters, projects, engagements would be after the master name. So here's the master, its indicator as to where the project 1 name would start. So if I was going to add a new client and I did North dot project 3, I think, yeah, 3, and then saved it, all the North, oh, we don't want to do a conflict check, cancel that. All the North attributes come in. There is no in reference to, there is no rates, there's nothing set up for these, but all of this copied from, there's nothing special about it, but all that copied from the master, which is North, project 1. Okay, so, and then when we're now creating a slip, so if we were to create a slip in Timeslips, you have a timekeeper, whoever, Brickley, and then we pick North, we get to type directly. This is, I like this, this is nice because you could type directly in this field, and you can drop it down and pick something else. Tabs opens up into this other field, other box, other dialogue, which is another step, but you know, it has its advantages and disadvantages. So this is where you would pick that, and here is that reference field. Let's go to one that I know has a reference. I think ABC actually has a reference, which are these different projects, matters, engagements. So you can actually pick one of these for each slip, as opposed to picking the client project once here. These client projects can actually have references as well to make it a step, a level deeper. But in this case, this one doesn't have a reference. So again, as you bill ABC, all of these references are going to be on the same bill. In the same, well, they could be billed separately, but they will be on the same accounts receivable. When you're looking at collection, you won't be able to identify which of these projects the actual payment applies to if you set it up this way. Whereas if you, each one of these individually, Atlantic, Eastern, North Project 1, North Project 2, North, they'll each have their own separate accounts receivable. And when a payment comes in, it should be easier to apply it to those specific engagements. So those are the differences in how Timeslips and Tabs handle the naming conventions. Oh, and actually in Timeslips, you can actually sort on these lists also. And you could type in here and go to Pierce. Or look in here and go to number 1. You can sort in this one and go to Bishop. So you could sort, you could type, you can get to a client in the client list, as well as when you're actually entering a slip. So if I know the client name is Pierce, right? I could type a P and it'll bring me to the first P, and I could type Pierce and it'll bring me to Pierce. Well, if I don't know the actual client name, I could switch this here and go to nickname 2 and type in the number. I could type in, 01 dash and get to the first 01 and so forth. So you could type and get to easily in these lists here, which in Tabs is a little different. You get to the other dialog box, and then you start with your filtering and your searching and your filtering. So, all right, that's what I wanted to cover in this training about the differences between Timeslips and Tabs and the naming conventions and how you would set them up in each, what their particular attributes are, and how you might use them. If you have any questions as to how either one of these might apply to your firm, if you're evaluating Timeslips or Tabs and have some questions, if you want me to clarify anything that we've talked about in this training, hopefully we will and are expecting to have additional trainings on different features in Tabs and Timeslips and the difference between them to help you decide on which application is right for you. So anytime you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. Jay Aronson, Data Link Solutions, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks. Take care.